There we go. All right. My name is Slater Elza. I'm an attorney, primary office out of Amarillo and Lubbock. With the firm, we represent about 225 school districts, about 75 cities, um, some junior colleges, although you can't call it that anymore. I get in trouble. To me, they're junior colleges. I grew up loving junior colleges. Um, and so we work in a lot of these towns. And we've been working with the city of Levelland for several years. And one of the things that came up this year is do we need to look at the city's charter? And uh, we'll talk a little bit about what that even means and then kind of where this thing is going to go. So, city charters are these documents, and we'll have a slide here in a minute. It really, people call it the Constitution of the city. And it really is. For towns over 5,000 people, they're allowed to have a charter that really lays out how they're going to govern themselves. Now, here's what we're finding out is a lot of these were created in the 1910s and the 1920s, and they've been amended two or three times since then. I think here, what do we decide, created in the 30s, 48, and amended 1990. So one way to look at that is that it's been 34 years since it's been amended. Another way to look at that is since 1948, it's been amended once. And so been a lot of changes since then. One of the biggest changes we've had is back then, towns were small. There wasn't a lot of access to information, and everything was run from up here by the city council and primarily by the mayor. And as things got more complex, people could move and travel more, and we were a more mobile society. We started seeing the rise of professional city managers. Made sense. Much the same way we've seen kind of a consolidation of city attorneys. Used to every town had a city attorney, had a school, somebody represented the school, and it's gotten too complex. And so a lot of that has become more professionalized, for lack of a better term. And so, and we're going to see this as we start digging into this charter. You have all these provisions from the very beginning that talk about this is what the mayor and the city council do. And then you're going to see other provisions where they changed it, 30 something years ago and said, oh my goodness, we have a city manager. We need to account for this as the person that's doing this work. But they didn't get rid of these. And so we have some contradictions. We have some stuff that needs to be updated, some different things. I will tell y'all that first I was probably, why are y'all the ones that are here? What we did is we asked each council member to pick a representative for this committee, the mayor too. And that's how we ended up with this group. They took it very seriously. They were very careful. We tried to get geographical diversity from different parts of the cities, different types of professional backgrounds, different kinds of education, different races, different genders, different everything, so that we had kind of everybody's viewpoint. And so these, whatever, and not kidding anybody, I mean, ultimately what goes to the voters will be chosen by the council. I've done a lot of these, and I can't think but maybe once or twice that somebody on the city council said, I realized what they were thinking when they brought this to us, but no. More often than not, I've had it go the other way. I've had them say, we need you to get in there and convince this committee or tell this committee that we need to get rid of term limits. Term limits came in a bunch of places back when we had the Tea Party movement. And they're problematic because we have enough trouble getting people to run, period, much less to throw people out that are doing a good job or are willing to continue to work. I took that to my committee, and the committee said, not only no, but we will campaign against anything they want to do on any other level if y'all do that. Had the same with pay is always a weird deal. And when we're talking pay, we're talking 10, 20, and $30 a month. We're not talking anybody's getting rich. These aren't county commissioners. So there are different things that that are worth discussion. But when we create a charter, we are required to have this committee. We are not required to have this committee to do amendments. But here's what I know. When you don't do this, all people have to do is Google a charter amendment and they start looking and seeing that there's a committee and they wonder why there's not. And what we have heard, we know at least in Pampa, and somebody was telling me recently, there was another one out here. They hired somebody from, kind of what I call the I-35 cities who came and said, you don't have to have it. Just pick what you want, put it on the ballot. And they lost. I mean, they lost every provision on those ballots. My belief is, I want to be transparent. I told them we're going to post this meeting. We're going to invite the media. We're going to record this and make this available for anybody that wants to see it. Because what we're not going to do is have people say that we tried to trick somebody and kind of pull this or push this through without letting people know what's going on. So approximately 350 Texas cities have city charters, and again, it will go to a vote. Every provision that is ultimately submitted will be a separate vote. So this is not a deal where you say, yes, all in or all no. It will be one by one by one. Now, what's always interesting to me is a lot of times you will see this and the vote will be 86% to 14% on all but one or two of the provisions. And you will see what's important. Even if they pass, that it'll be a much closer vote. We had one over in Muleshoe where somebody got mad and somebody got on Facebook, and I mean, what they said was not even close to correct, but it got some traction and it was much, much closer. And so ultimately, when we come out of this, in the next month or two, what we will be doing is you will see a lot of people, hopefully some of y'all included, that will be going around to civic groups, to our school board, to our county commissioners, to our college board, so that everybody knows and understands what's going on or why we're doing things. So why do we have to change? Because as we do these, and we started doing these probably 8 or 9 years ago, nobody out here had ever really done them. But you start looking through these and you find crazy things. This is one of my favorite. This was in Childress. All law enforcement and their families are entitled to free access to movies and other houses of entertainment. I don't even know what a house of entertainment is. But that was the law. I mean, in that town, it's from 1911. Another one that we've come across is no flying of kites that would annoy someone. Your choice to, or your obligation to figure out what would annoy someone. The chief of police will be elected by the citizens. That doesn't sound crazy, but police chiefs aren't elected. They had been there forever. And so we got ready for this. Is the first time. It was not a town that I regularly worked with. And I said, so tell me, I mean, do y'all have people run for that when it's up? And they said, oh yeah, we quit doing that years ago. So, okay, we can't just quit doing something. We've got to either start doing the elections again, or let's get rid of that provision. Had another one that's not up here that said a city, that city could not sell, rent, lease, or otherwise dispose any property. And so all of these lots, get tax foreclosures and different things through the years. People gift them to the city. Nothing could be done with them. And so that's why we were hired. They said, you've got to fix this one thing. And nobody knew why it was. One of my lawyers has a babysitter in Pampa. And it's an older couple that are keeping his kids for the weekend. And they're laughing and talking about it. And the guy goes, well, I know why that was. I used to live in that town. It's because the town owns all the land around the lake outside of town. And they have these long leases, but they own the land. And nobody wanted them to be able to sell that land underneath these houses. Okay, we can fix that. We can make that the provision there, but not here. This is my absolute favorite. Elected council members would be subjected to drug testing when randomly selected, again, selected by the city manager. Probably made sense back in whatever year that was done. We've seen things so old that it talked about what direction you could drive your animals on certain streets on certain days of the week. And so again, part of this is just professionalizing this, getting it more up to date. I really don't think that y'all are going to see anything and go, wow, this is a power grab by somebody. It really is about cleaning things up. Here is an inconsistency that we will talk about in different parts through the coming meetings. One part of the charter here says the city manager will hire every employee except the city secretary, chief of police, tax collector, and the city attorney. That means those four positions would be hired by the council. We get down here, it says the city council will hire, well, now we have the municipal court judge. We still have the city manager, the tax assessor, and the city attorney. But then we're going to talk about the chief of police and city secretary will be hired by the city manager, but have to be confirmed by the city council. So we have about three different ways of hiring people in different positions, just something that needs to be cleaned up. Does not matter. Y'all have a very good city council. Y'all have a very good administration that work well together. The problem becomes when they don't. And I don't know if it happened down here. It happened all over the panhandle, upper panhandle. We had these positions that counties had created. I think there were constitutional provisions for constables that had been empty for years. Nobody ever did it. There's nothing for constables to do anymore. And there was an attorney who came up with this idea. I'm going to get people to run in each of these. And then once they're elected, then they can demand a budget, then they can demand a staff, then they can do these different things. There's this huge cottage industry of somebody that was manipulating the system because that's what was there. The town that called and said, we're supposed to elect our police chiefs, it's going to be a problem if somebody showed up and said, I want to apply to be on the ballot to be police chief. So those are the types of things we're looking at. So we're seeing more and more of these. I've already got these booked, for lack of a better term, into 2027 this year, or 2025, 2026, 2027. And none of those have been amended anytime in the recent past. As we talked about, I think having the committee is vital. I think having the media involved is vital. One of all of our jobs, and I ask y'all to do the same as we get into here, is to watch social media. If there's information out there that is not correct or is incomplete, we want to be able to address that. So what does this committee do? You meet with me. We've got the major players from administration here, and y'all will ultimately make recommendations to the council. One of the things that I will be asking is, and as you notice, the council is not here, and that's not them. That's not a lack of interest. I got pretty crossways with the council when I said, you know what, I don't want y'all there. Because if they're here and they're sitting here, I don't get any communication from here. Everybody thinks, well, they're here, they're watching us, they'll just do what they want. But we will be talking to them. We will be having some of these same discussions with them. And I would love for y'all to be there at these upcoming council meetings. Not all of you, but let's make sure that we have one or two people that are there that can at least address what we're doing. So tonight's kind of tough because we're going to get into some substantive ideas. But again, I don't think anybody here knew what to expect. Sometimes people show up at the first meeting and they've read every word and they have 10,000 questions. Sometimes they're like, just going to wait and kind of see how this goes. So we will dip our toes into this today, but we'll have at least one more meeting and probably two. And at those future meetings, anything we've previously talked about is on the table, because once you've had a time to look at it, to think about it, to see some of the later provisions, you might well have questions. Continue working through potential areas of concern. If y'all, as it says, provide the media information if they need it or request it, but if y'all have information that you want or would like to see, we'll certainly get that for you. As we talked about, council is not here, but obviously this will ultimately be their decision. One of my jobs is to make sure they are not surprised, right? I mean, I don't want to show up on the last day and say, guess what my crazy bunch of people came up with. I want them, because they are the ones that are ultimately accountable to the voters. But at the same time, one of the things I tell them is you can't go through life having committees that you're not going to listen to. Doesn't mean you have to listen to every single thing that comes out of, whether it's planning and zoning, board of adjustments, or this committee. Nobody's going to donate their time if y'all aren't going to at least listen to them and understand why they are recommending things. So this is perfect. This is your question. So one of the questions that I got when I walked in tonight was, so how's this ballot look? You know, if we have a 6 or 7 line provision and we're changing 5 things in it, are each one of those a different provision? Because he had done some reading, I know he'd done some reading that said each of these changes is submitted individually. It's not, like I said, it's not a thumbs up or a thumbs down. There's not a ton of direction, but we will break these up a lot. But if we're changing one paragraph in 3 or 4 ways, that will in all likelihood be submitted as one paragraph, because those things, theoretically, if they're in the same paragraph, we learned in elementary school, what? They're related. And so, you know, one of the things that we try to do is let's make sure we're consistent with who has what responsibilities. Let's make sure we're doing things. So y'all will see this as we jump in here tonight. Lots of provisions on how we are going to have a tax assessor and collector. In the old days, every city had a tax assessor and collector. Who do you get your tax bill from now? The appraisal district, right? And so we don't have that anymore. We have, you know, where we'll see that some towns will say, you know, we're going to have a director of finance. Well, we don't have a director of finance anymore. We might have an assistant city manager who's in charge of the financial aspects. Sometimes we have a city secretary who is a whiz with numbers, and that's the person that, in addition to their other duties, is taking the lead on financial stuff. What we do know is in this day and age, when money's tight and we have budgets and we've got to stay within those budgets and we can't just raise taxes when we want to anymore, we match up strengths and we want to have that flexibility so that we can continue to do that. You will see some things just no longer within the provision of a home rule city. What is in there just conflicts with state law. You're going to see a lot of that starting tonight with elections. I mean, it'll say stuff like, we're going to have the election on this date. I think y'all's is actually at least that 1st May, but a lot of times it doesn't say that. Then it says the applications are due by this date. Well, you can't do that anymore because we have federal law that says we got kids overseas that have a right to vote. We got to be able to call the election, print the ballots, mail the ballots, get the ballots back. Can't do that in this short window that y'all have provided for. Similarly, and this does apply to what we will talk about here, you'll see them that say, all right, we had the election. We didn't get a winner. We'll have a runoff. We'll do it next Tuesday. Can't do that anymore because we've got to do the same thing, right? Got to be able to print the ballots, send them overseas, get them back. So things like that are now subject to federal law and primarily state law that's implementing and accounting for federal law. And so what we now say is instead of having all of these different provisions for elections, we really end up saying we're going to follow state law. We're going to follow state law. And that way, when it changes, as it does pretty frequently, we're not having to come back and do this or have a charter that's out of date already. As we said, I'd love to have one or more of y'all at city council meetings, and we need the council supporting what we come up with, because the council has to be supportive of this election, and y'all staff have to be out explaining the process and the amendments and having consistent answers. That's one of the reasons we talk about this several times, is so what I don't want is 3 of y'all all agreeing that we need to do this certain thing, but you all 3 have different reasons. And when you go out and you talk to the media or you talk to your friends and your neighbors, and they're saying, well, I don't understand. I thought we were doing this for this. In this day and age, that's all it takes to submarine something. And so, again, we want the other governmental entities to understand, the civic groups. We will have public hearings, at least one, maybe more. here, probably attached to council meetings so that anybody can come address thoughts, concerns, ideas that they have. Unfortunately, I suspect it'll be like many public hearings that we have that nobody will show up and nobody will speak. But if they want to, they're going to have that opportunity. Local radio is a big deal. I don't know a lot about. Do y'all have a local radio station? Yeah, a lot of these towns do. Hartford, nothing happens unless the radio says it happens. Up by Perryton, same thing. Still a very powerful medium in these towns. So let's jump right in. And I think the idea is to go probably an hour and 15 minutes or so, give you all a chance to ask some questions. I figure what we have a night, or what we have on a night like tonight is either you're a Cowboys fan and want to go watch the Cowboys, or you hate the Cowboys so much you want to go watch them get beat. But any of you would rather be there than here. These people have heard me say this. One of my great frustrations was the city of Hereford. For years and years, they meet every other Monday. And during football season, we could have a meeting in 25 minutes because that got everybody home for Monday Night Football. When we got past football season, they couldn't get done in 2 hours. They just sit there and talk and gossip. But we do want to respect your time. So I think y'all have copies of the charter there. Yes, sir. I can just tell you they're not. I can tell you they're not because those are handled through ordinances. Every time we have an annexation, or I guess theoretically a de-annexation, somebody leaving the city limits, we have an ordinance. It's just kind of a long lifetime running deal that changes that. But yeah, that is always an interesting observation. But no, that I would guarantee you. No, man, you need a better hobby. The you need a better hobby than figuring out meets and bounds. No, we will talk about that. Some I've got a land use guy who's really it's a guy named Brian Guyman who will take what this group puts together and what I take back to him from this group, and he will start creating the ballot language and formalizing some of that. But that's more of a yeah, it's an interesting idea because it is a living, breathing concept, especially if you're a growing town, especially if you're a growing town. So, Article 3, Section 7, damages. This is one of these deals that just through the years has become outdated. What your charter says is anybody that is hurt, injured, damaged by the city, meaning a city employee or city equipment, has to give notice within 30 days to the city secretary that they've been hurt. That is a prerequisite to filing a lawsuit. So in the old days, you waited 45 days, which is still pretty quick. I mean, you could still be going to the doctor, your car could still be in the shop, whatever. The you had 30 days and then it was King's X. Well, state law kind of broadened that for state issues to 180 days. And what the attorney general has said is 30 days and 60 days are just too short. I think the last time I looked, he hadn't really commented on 90 or 120, but it's a pretty good bet that if the state is going to allow somebody 180 days, that we ought to be doing the same. Used to be in all of them provisions that they had to wait 90 days after they gave that notice before they could file a lawsuit. And I'm okay with that. And your charter has that provision. And one of the reasons that's important is it gives the city and their insurance company or the risk pool from the Texas Municipal League 90 days is theoretically enough time to look at it, investigate it, try to figure it out, and resolve it without a lawsuit being filed. Because one of the things that we know in this day and age very much has changed over the last 10 years. Once the lawsuit's filed, it just takes a long time to get it resolved. So any thoughts or questions on that? I mean, some of these to me are just catching up with state law, but if you have questions or thoughts before we move on, certainly let me know. Here's the other thing. if you've marked one of these in your notes that doesn't pop up on mine, it may be that it matches up with something we're going to talk about later, but it may not. So just say, hey, can we stop and talk about this provision, or can you put this on for next time we're together to address this one? So the next one is utilities. And I thought this was a very odd provision, and I had not seen this provision before, but your charter restricts purchasing contracts for electricity, oil, gas, and related materials to 2-year agreements. And I think I understand where that came from, because we have this theoretical rule that a council should not be binding future councils to spending money, because it could be a completely different council. And normally what it says is past this fiscal year and next, because that allows you to do kind of next year's budget. So I think that's probably where the 2 years come from. But we do know this, that there are certain provisions in the utility code that might make it beneficial or required to look out a little further than that, or to have, even just a contract that would work for backup, in case we had some type of catastrophic event. This is one of those that in the end, when we prioritize, if we have too many, might not ultimately be one y'all recommend, but we want the city to have maximum flexibility. Any of y'all who have served on governmental boards, who work for governmental entities, I think would agree with this statement, because this is what we see. We have all of these laws that are about transparency. We're gonna get bids on purchasing. We're gonna do these different things because theoretically they save money. They don't save money. They drive the cost of everything up, and that's okay. We can live with that, but we do want our governmental entities to have maximum flexibility to do what's best for the city or the school district or the county or whoever we're talking about. Franchise agreements. This is the only thing that I'm going to tell you I have a self-interest in. So you think franchise agreements, is that the new Wendy's? No. Franchise agreements deal with utility companies, SPS, Atmos, whoever y'all have here, cable providers, telephone providers. They use the city's infrastructures. They have wires above ground. They have wires underground. All of that's on city property. And the idea is they should compensate the city for the use of those areas. Now, if you look, and if you never have, you will now, look at your electric bill, and it has an amount, and then it'll have a franchise fee that's charged to the homeowner or the business owner. That's part of it. Part of it's embedded in the main part. And I mean, nobody's kidding anybody here. I mean, if they have to pay it or we have to pay it, who's paying it? We are. I mean, because we're paying both of those, but one of them will be broken out. So that's what a franchise is. They're very important. And although they've been kind of carved out by the state in certain instances in the last few years, they're still a significant source of revenue for the city. And they're long. What, James, 25, 30 pages sometimes or longer, sometimes on legal size pieces of paper, single spaced. And y'all have a requirement that those have to be read in full, word for word, at 3 separate meetings. I'll quit before I have to do that. It's just miserable. And I don't know if they've done it here, but we've done it in other cities. We've had a legal assistant record it, put it on 1.5 times speed, put it in the back corner on low so that anybody that wants to go listen to it can go listen to it while we continue to have the meeting. Now, it seems silly, but it's one of these things that is just not necessary in this day and age. In the old days, that was big, and that was a huge revenue opportunity for the city, but you wanted people to know what was going on, right? And so the only way you couldn't post on Facebook, you couldn't post on the website, you couldn't just get it in the newspaper and have them talk about it. You couldn't just run off copies for anybody that wanted to come up here and get a copy. And so I think it was a way of getting information to the community. That's handled now. All of these things are available on multiple occasions. I still have towns that require it twice. Um, a lot of them are going to once. And the idea being that we treat it like we do. And y'all do, I'm sorry, James, y'all do two readings of regular ordinances. And that's something that we'll talk about, not tonight, but I want to get some input from this team, because I can see the benefit, of having it twice. Somebody didn't realize it was so important, or they did a little half turn when they voted to approve it this time. And so it gives people a chance to get organized and come. That does not really offend me. It's a problem in other towns, and it becomes a joke in other towns. Some towns say an ordinance has to be read twice. So they read it at the beginning of the meeting and the end of the meeting. What does that serve? I mean, that serves no purpose. Some say, okay, we'll just call two meetings. We'll call one for Thursday, one for Friday, one. We started seeing some said there has to be at least 5 days. I've got a new city down in the Permian Basin. It's 30 days. There has to be 30 days separation between them. And so when you start getting into budget, and she will tell you when you're getting into budget, you're getting the tax rolls later than we've ever gotten them. You have to do that. Then you have all these steps you have to take. And by the time you do that, the calendar is so compressed. It is a real problem. So there's probably somewhere in between there, but it certainly doesn't need to be three times. And we will be talking again at one of our upcoming meetings on this idea of reading ordinances word for word. Again, in this day and age, um, that bores the citizens that come, and it doesn't serve a tremendous amount of purpose. One of the things that I've done is, let's read the caption. Let's talk about the important parts. I'll announce the important parts of it. Um, but y'all know what lawyers are like. I mean, just words sometimes. Let's get to what matters. So definitely we need to consider lowering it from three um, as we as we get into this at our next meeting. We'll decide how we want to do one versus two fines. So y'all from 30 something years ago have a provision that says fines can never be more than $200. And that will still take care of a lot of the fines that we're dealing with. But in 30 more years, it may not. And so this is one of these, and you'll start to see a pattern here where one of the things for y'all to consider recommending is, you know what, our fines will be within what's allowed by state law. Gives ultimate flexibility. Doesn't have to be that high, but it can be low. I mean, there are provisions out there. Um, Trying to think what's fines that are more than $200. I can tell you parking in a handicap space is one of them, but we also have a lot of health and safety fines that can be up to $2,000. And I can guarantee you, health and safety code violations are not about making money. It's about how do we get compliance. And having that, every day that you're not going to comply with this health and safety issue is a $2,000 fine as opposed to 200. You get their attention a lot quicker. I can guarantee you this city, like every other city, would rather have compliance than the money from a code violation. But again, big difference from, I put 73 there, but from 1990 to 2024. So again, one of those things of just catching up. But how do we word this so that 30 years from now, we're not out of date again? City manager. And again, I think this will be probably what we talk about more than maybe any other topics. I read this to y'all earlier that's this provision, Article 4, Section 2. Um, so current charter says they're going to hire, or the city manager is going to hire everyone except the city secretary, chief of police, tax collector, and assessor, which doesn't involve anymore, and the city attorney, who actually works for the council, not really for the city. But so why does this matter? from a practical standpoint, who's ultimately responsible for how the city runs, how the different departments treat our citizens, and for keeping us within budget? It's the city manager. And so one of the thoughts that's out there, one of the whole reasons for going to a city manager form of government, which y'all have done, is you want a professional running those things, somebody that has the time and the expertise to pay attention to those things and who can pivot and make decisions on short notice. Um, I I've had police chiefs get arrested, right? And if we're in a town where those decisions are up to the city council, we're at least 72 hours away because that's not an emergency. We can't just have a meeting. But I don't think I finished this thought. If this person right here, your city manager, is going to be responsible for budgets, for accountability, for oversight, really hard not to give him or her the authority to run the organization as it needs to be run. Now, here's the deal. You say, well, is that a lot of power in one person? Yeah. Is that misplaced power in one person? Could be if you hired the wrong person. I mean, ultimately, all power comes back to the city council. Why? Because they control the checkbook, they control the budget. And so it is not going around the council. It's really about efficiency. It's about professionalism. And it's about, again, are we going to be able to continue to hire good people in the future for that position if they don't have the power that they need and the authority that they need to run things well? Now, that being said, the council should hire the city manager. That's obvious. I mean, who else would do that? The municipal judge, because this is going to sound crazy, but remember when we were in elementary school and junior high, you learned about separation of powers? I'm telling you, the court is really kind of its own deal. Very hard to fire a municipal judge because why? The first council member whose kid gets an MIP goes in there and says, you better make this go away, or number one, I'm going to fire you, or number two, I'm going to cut your salary. You think, well, who would do that? Trust me, I've had it done multiple times, but there is some division there. And then the city attorney, who everywhere except for Amarillo in the free world works for the council, not for the city manager. And that's just a factor of loyalty, right? I mean, that group up there has to have somebody who's looking out for them because they are the city. Uh, but other than that, I think it makes a lot of sense for that, uh, the rest of that authority to fall with the city manager. Any thoughts on that? Seem different? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. What we've seen, there's not a lot of those are pretty high level professional jobs theoretically, and so they've got a lot of flexibility. What we're seeing is, and I will tell you, the school districts do not do this as well as cities. School districts, I see a lot. They know who they want to hire, and they won't even open it up. They'll just say, "We're going to do an internal search first, and we're going to find someone. If we don't, then we'll open it up." It breeds distrust. I mean, it is problematic and it is unfair to the person that they hire. So that's one part of it. Where I see cities almost universally go is to hire a consultant. There are statewide organizations, not organizations, businesses that will get it out there, that will advertise it, that will do the screening. You would be amazed at the applications you get for these jobs. You know, yeah, I'm a night shift patrol officer in Orlando, Florida. It's always been my dream to move. We'll just call it. It's always been my dream to move to Littlefield. No, it hadn't. Um, that's one part of what we get, which is crap, and they can just get rid of that. The other thing that we get are, and I see it out here because I mean, this is where I work, is out here, is we see every 25-year-old kid who graduated from the University of Texas or Texas A&M, that's the third assistant economic development director in charge of retention for business in industries that begin with a vowel and end in a consonant. I mean, because they're in these big, huge, and they're wanting to break into city management. They don't want to be the low man on the totem pole. And so they're willing to come out somewhere like here because they have to make a 2-year commitment. That's part of their ethics. And so they'll come for 2 years, but that just means we're doing this again in 2 years. So what we have found is to engage one of those organizations. There's some local, what I call quasi-government, like SPAG, South Plains Association of Government, or PRPC up in Amarillo, that are starting to get into that a little bit. But ultimately, the decision, if they do their job right, they're coming back with 3 or 5 people, and cities can always add to it. And I've seen that happen, add to the list. But then ultimately, the city council will make that decision. Municipal judges is kind of misleading because there are no qualifications to be a municipal judge. There's in some huge towns there are. Even in Amarillo, there are that you have to be an attorney. But I mean, a lot of them are retired electricians, or a lot of retired probation officers, something along those lines. So that one more about fit than qualifications. But yeah, I interview pretty regularly with cities before, and there's 4 or 5 firms from around the state that are normally there. A lot of times, what I see is they'll score them. 30% of the score will be based on the size of cities you've represented. 30 will be on references, 30 will be on this, and 10 will be on that. But that's how we typically see it. Not required. But I think from a credibility standpoint, that works best. I think that's what we've done here in the recent past with police chief. I think even with fire, we used a consultant. Yeah. It's just easier. And sometimes they just have access to information that we don't. I mean, I always think we're a good resource because representing 75 cities, we've either been in a city that person's from, or we know somebody from a city that they're from. And that information's valuable. That information's valuable. And sometimes they'll say, hey, this lady looks pretty impressive. Here's the rest of the story that you might not know, otherwise. Does that answer the question? It's kind of a rambling shot at it, but I get paid by the word, so you got to be careful. So this is important, and I think this is one. Go do some homework on this one. The duties and powers of the city manager, and y'all kind of have a paragraph that a little bit all over the place. I kind of like this approach. I haven't even talked about it with your current city manager, but this is one that we see in a lot of towns that just lays these out. Responsible for enforcing laws and ordinances, appoint and remove heads of departments and subordinate officers, employees. It's what we were talking about earlier. That is really the foundation of the city manager form of government. Exercise control over all departments and subdivisions. Y'all may not think that is a big deal, but just up the road from y'all, one of my very first towns, we would have meetings, and the guy that sat over here on this side is a little more of a you than this one. He'd say, last Thursday, what was Ronnie doing? I said, I don't know why. And say, well, I went by the South Well field, and he was out there, and I watched him for an hour and a half, and he was out there. And then after that, he went over to the other side of town to do this. And about 45 minutes later, and it's like, dude, you're a stalker. And you need a job or a hobby, the people that sit up there don't run the day to day. And it's hard in a town like this because you go to church with the people, your kids or your grandkids go to school and play sports and all of those things with these people. I did keep talking about police chiefs getting arrested, but I had a police chief get arrested, got a little drunk, ran into a neighbor's car, just went, parked it back. Everything's good, right? So the next morning, what'd they do? They got up and their car's really damaged. They didn't call 911. They didn't call the police department. They didn't call the sheriff's department. They called their buddy that lives down the street, the chief of police. They're like, hey, somebody hit our car. And he's like, I'll walk down there and investigate. But we have that happen. And it's tough when you're on that city council and somebody comes up to you and says, man, I'm really having this problem. I work for the city, as you know, and my boss is doing this to me. The easy thing is to say, what? Hey, I'll take care of that. Well, then you come get the rest of the story, and it's not. And so having those clear lines of who's responsible for what does become very important. So these are important things that we've laid out there. Franchises we talked about, to attend all the meetings of the council with the right to take part in the discussion, but having no vote. Doesn't make much sense. And you're not going to get very good candidates the next time you need a city manager when you say, you know what, we're stuck with you and you can show up, but we're not going to listen to you. You're not going to talk. Recommend to the council for adoption of measures that he or she deems necessary or expedient. Same thing that we see in superintendent contracts, which is, and I've got a lawsuit right now for a school district where they said, oh, this superintendent was completely out of line. She recommended to the school board that they do this. Well, yeah, you don't want the school board figuring it out themselves, right? We've hired a professional, and that's how this works. Absolutely important. Keep the council at all times fully advised of the financial condition and the needs of the city. That's in the preparation of the budget. That's in monthly reports. That's in end of the year budget adjustments, or sometimes interim budget adjustments when things have come up, or something we thought we were going to spend money on didn't, and we could use that money for a different purpose. And it goes all the way through the audit, which is what we use to close out the year. It is the city manager's absolute obligation to make sure that somebody's paying attention to the budget. Doesn't matter how big a department you have that might be running that. To act as a budget commissioner, to see that the city lives within the budget. You see how important this is. Either personally or by one or more assistant city managers, execute the documents, contracts, legal instruments on behalf of the city as provided by the charter or the ordinance and resolutions of the council. That's still the check on your city manager, except in very limited situations that involve minor amounts of money. He or she cannot be out there binding. I had a city manager this morning call and say, can you draft us up something where I can start signing contracts? And I said, number one, is the person that represents those ladies and gentlemen up there? No. Is somebody that works with you on a daily basis? No. Why would you want that? Why would you want that? Why would you not want the cover of your bosses to make sure that they know what's going on and nobody's second guessing? It made a lot of sense when you heard it out loud based on a lot of years of experience. And to perform such other duties as may be prescribed by the charter, by ordinance, or resolution of the council. So those are, 11. We could turn those 11 into 33. We could probably turn those 11 into 5. But think back to those and go back and read those after we leave here tonight. And think about, it really covers most everything that you would need for the day-to-day running of the city. Anything that's not in the day-to-day is going to come here. It's going to come to the council. We have meetings where financials are there. I've got different cities that are different. I've got one of your neighbors that we sit there and they say, all right, let's go through the checkbook register. They're like, I see a check for $6.57 to Jerry's Tire. What was that? And they'll say, well, we had a flat and, he put a patch on it for us. Did you talk to Mike before you got it from Jerry? No. Mike's on our volunteer fire department. And I'm telling you, every meeting has about 25 of those. It is disrespectful to the citizens, to the employees, but it's okay. The better way of doing that is they get this stuff. You always make sure they have it the Friday before and you look through it. And if you have a question, call him or him or her. It's not about keeping information. Part of it's about how do we best use our time. But anyway, I want y'all to look at that and get me some input on what y'all think about that. But I think that is a very very solid approach. Nepotism. I thought this was interesting. Y'all's charter prohibits, okay, sorry. Y'all's charter prohibits employment of any person related uh, to just call leadership by blood or marriage. Okay, number one, that probably theoretically covers everybody, right? Practically in a town like this, it covers a lot of people. And sometimes it's just not doable otherwise. And, what we have is, and we can set this up in different ways, but what the state will say is we don't want anybody that is related to, it's usually going to be the person who's making the decisions on hiring and firing within this many levels. We don't want a parent or a child, a grandparent or a grandchild, or aunts and uncles. We get too much further out in a town, even this size. But think about Tulia, think about Dimmitt, think about Stratford, think about Sudan and Sundown. If you had this, you're really affecting who you can hire. And so this is another one where I think it's going to give more flexibility to your city. But what we say is, in my opinion, let's just follow state law. Schools, if any of y'all have ever been around schools or school districts, you always have this issue of who's hiring who. Is it the board that's hiring people? Is it the superintendent that's hiring people? Every superintendent comes with a husband who can coach football, right? And we need usually somebody that can coach. So how do we do that and manage it? I think it's certainly good to have rules. We do not want situations where we're hiring just our families and friends, but we need a little more flexibility probably than what y'all currently have. Thoughts on that? Okay, this is a great one. City manager's bond is set at $5,000. That wouldn't cover the taco lunch that he bought for staff, right? And so it just simply does not accomplish much. If you've ever been around bonds, they're for the most part problematic. I've done this for 25 years in hundreds of different cases, and it just seems interesting to me that the bonding company, I think every time but one has found a reason they don't have to pay the bond. The one time they did was a city secretary that stole $260,000 up the highway here and had a $10,000 bond. And every month for the 10 years that she was on probation, we receive a letter from the bonding company saying we would like her restitution payment back to reimburse us for the bond. So I'm just telling you, the one time it worked, didn't, but we have to have them, and they do serve a purpose. But again, $5,000 serves no purpose. Here is a lot. I'll read it. The city manager and any person performing the duties of custodian of city funds. That's who we're worried about, right? Anybody that touches the money or is over the touching of money shall each give official bonds in such sums as may be prescribed by the council from time to time by ordinance. That means we still have a lawmaking process, but we have the people who are ultimately responsible for running the city make sure that the amounts are right. Bonds are payable to the city of Levelland, conditioned on the faithful discharge of the duties of such officers, meaning if they were doing their job and they were trying to do their job and trying to do it correct, they are going to be, in many ways, protected. We want it with a company that's authorized to do business in Texas, and the city will pay the premiums. One time, I tell stories. I tell too many stories, but I had a city manager I'd never worked with in a city I'd never worked with. He called and said, "Hey, the superintendent's on my school board or on my city council, and he says that I can't just have a friend's son build a new fire station." I said, "He's absolutely right. Anything else?" And he said, well, I got you on the phone. I have to have a $50,000 bond. And I called, and the annual premium for my $50,000 bond is $48,500. I said, "What have you done?" And he said, "Well, my family owned a bank and the FDIC took the bank from us. And when I was in charge, and I filed bankruptcy 4 times, and it's like, Okay, you're the person we don't want. And the city's not going to pay $48,000 to have $50,000 worth of protection. All those bonds are then approved by the council and recorded with the city secretary. They're public records so that they are available to see. Again, I like this because it's flexible. It gives different amounts. I mean, you might have somebody that's filling in, they have a job over here, but during the week that we take water payments, um, bill payments, they move over into that department. So maybe they do need to be bonded, but maybe it's not the same as your city manager or your assistant city manager. Um, Qualifications. I'm very interested in your thoughts on this. Y'all's current charter says a candidate has to reside in their district for 6 months prior to the first day when they run. I've seen them that say you have to, 6 months or 3 months before the first day they would take office. I'm not offended by any of that, but I will tell y'all, as I was leaving the other day, somebody said, "Hey, you're going to be in charge of the charter. Make sure we have loyal people that are from here that have lived here at least a year before they're off, running for a position." Part of that is if they're not qualified, not the right person, we have a way to deal with that. It's called not electing them. And you say, well, but what if they're the only person that runs? Again, that may be an us problem and not a them problem. But I am not offended at all by 12 months versus 6 months. We have usually been recommending. I was looking back at some of ours this weekend as I was preparing for tonight. 12 months is pretty fair. I mean, it's at least giving them time to get here and understand what the issues are in our town. Thoughts about that? Because I think it's perfectly, I mean, it's as logical to say, you know what, if they've been here a day and they care enough to run, let them run. I've also seen people say, I now live in a little bitty town in Oklahoma. I mean, I still have an apartment and work out of Amarillo and Lubbock. But my joke is little towns, there are only two kinds of people they don't like: the ones that grew up here and went off and didn't come back because they're disloyal and shouldn't ever be trusted again. The other kind of people they don't like are people that move into the town because they're not invested in the community and they can't be trusted, right? Kind of covers everybody but those of us who grew up in a certain town. But thoughts: 6 months, 3 months, a year, none. Say it. Okay. You've been here a full year. You've been here through a whole school cycle. You've been here through a whole budget cycle. I mean, there's some logic to that. Yeah, we have Congress for that. Yeah. Um, that's a problem. And so one of y'all's talks about residing in the district. I will tell you, a lot of them that I've seen say you've lived within the city. And so it wouldn't matter, if you moved. Um, that really does bring up another issue that I think we'll talk about more. We're trying to understand it better, but after each census, cities and schools oftentimes run into redistricting issues. And while we try to protect incumbents, it's not always possible, and all of a sudden we'll have to redraw those lines. We'll end up with two people that could be affected. And so I'm not offended at all. Right. Yeah, no, but that's hard. But it's right along the lines of they may live right outside the city, but they're one of us. I mean, that's the feeling. And we want rules that, I mean, we trust people that are one of us, but maybe not otherwise. But we can play around with that language. And again, when I have good direction from y'all, we will draft up this ballot language for however many provisions that we come up with or that y'all come up with. And those are where we will flesh out some of those because yeah, 12 months, if you live in the city, but not necessarily that district. I mean, that's what the language, are y'all acting up?
Talking about someone living just outside of the city being less.
Yeah. Well, I know, but remember, she also didn't have water for a long time and that may or may not have been on purpose. Um, yes, she begged us. She's like, move that line around. And so, all good points, but I think that, I would welcome a discussion and if ultimately that's this committee's recommendation, that potentially be changed to, living in the city. Okay, let's go through a couple more of these. Again, this is one that I kind of prefaced. Qualifications for running also sets forth, one of the qualifications is you applied by this date in relationship to when it's going to be called or when you go into office. Again, this is one of these, we will continue to see them that it doesn't matter if you change it or not, state law is going to govern. Hereford, the hospital district had a deal. Hospital districts are weird in the sense that there's a statute that creates each one throughout the state and not just one statute that says this applies to all hospital districts or all rural hospital districts. And they're all different. And the one in Hereford said applications can be picked up this day, they're due this date. And they didn't call me. They had a new guy. He's brilliant. I mean, he was fantastic. But on the day that there's opened, the newspaper called and said, well, with today being the closing date for applications, who all did you get? And he said, no, ours opened today. Well, state law said, doesn't matter what any other statute says, state law on elections now is what governs. And so he was wrong. The problem was he'd had one person come pick one up that day. It's not very fair that that person becomes the sole elected person, right? I will tell y'all, I called the Secretary of State, maybe the Attorney General, I think it was the Secretary of State, and I said, what do we do? What do we do? And it's some of the greatest advice I ever heard was, wow, you can't fix this one. We would recommend, and we will never take responsibility for saying it, but just leave it open like you were gonna, like you've advertised, like in the minutes, it's in the newspaper. If you treat everybody the same, it's gonna be hard for anybody to gripe. It's not really a legal solution. But state law, they don't go through when they do that. I mean, there's thousands of election provisions and your legislature doesn't go through and clean them all up. They just do this one. And that now supersedes all of these other ones. So again, not a lot of controversy there. Canvassing elections. Anybody here been a part of an elected government board? So after the election's over, you have a meeting and you canvass the election to make sure the results are right, I guess. I mean, I don't know how you would know. I've always been intrigued by it. I've got a town. It's an hour-long process. They get all of the voting records from, and you can see their fingers and they point through and they point through. And I've, for 20 years, wanted to say, y'all have no idea what the hell you're looking at all. But that's what they do. Others, they say we need to canvass the election. I move that we can't, boom, let's go. Here is one of the issues is you have certain time periods, no sooner than 3 days after the election, nor more than 8 or something like that. You have to do this. Well, your current charter says we're going to canvass these elections at the next regular meeting of the council. Well, I think we're required to have one meeting a month, but we have two. I mean, that's just so we can take care of business. But that means one of those is the regular meeting and one of them probably isn't. And so if you've had your first one before the election, you're not going to be able to meet those time limits. Again, state law probably would govern and protect you, but we just don't need provisions out there that might not fit with the obligations that our council has. Dates, your charter says the first Saturday of the month of May, which is when the election date is. Wasn't necessarily until not too long ago, or several years ago. It was one of them, but that's what you have. Not anything that, well, then it also says that elections will be held in accordance with state law, except as otherwise herein expressly provided. Now, we're going to follow the law unless we choose not to. That's a provision that probably needs to be cleaned up much more than first Saturday in the month of May. But if we're going to clean it up, what I would say is elections will be held on a uniform election day, or according to state law, says the same thing. And I think that we can do away with this, the kind of bragging, beating our chest that we're going to follow the law unless we don't want to. Not sure that sends the message that y'all want to send. Runoff dates, again, we previewed this. We see this a lot. Runoff dates will be determined by the council. Is what your current charter says. It's just not true. Again, even if, what? Yeah, absolutely tells you to. And if you tried to do something different, you'd be in trouble. So again, I don't think anything super controversial there, and but needs to be addressed. Trying to remember why I put this one on here. Should any candidate fail to receive a majority of the votes, governing authority shall immediately order a runoff election to be held on a date as prescribed by the Texas Election Code. At which runoff, okay, I think this is some proposed language that would take care of this. At which runoff election, the names of only the two candidates receiving the highest number of votes for that office be printed on the ballot, submitted to the qualified voters. With only two, then you're going to have a candidate receive a majority. That being said, I can't tell you how many times there is a freaking tie in elections. We have it at least every other election. And we've done everything from drawing cards to guilting people into just, please give up. Officers, this one's interesting to me because again, if somebody really wanted to be ugly about it, the current charter sets forth that elected and appointed officers of the city, just hard to figure out what that really means. Because appointed officers, when you look at, there's lots of different resources that would tell you that could be lots of different things, some of which are not consistent. But elected and appointed officers of the city will take the oath of office and execute a bond as may be required by the charter, ordinances, or resolution. Well, y'all have stuff that's not may, it's shall. That's number one. So we have a contradiction. Number two, the idea of who gets the oath is a bit problematic because we do oaths to police officers, but I don't think they would, and this is silly because words mean different things. They would not be considered officers of the city. They can't go out and bind the city on something. So small o versus maybe capital O, the municipal judge takes an oath, probably not an officer. Do y'all take oaths?
No, I do not.
Right. And so who's the best shot of being a non-elected officer? Probably those two. And I'm telling you, I've never heard of city managers or assistant city managers taking an oath. But again, this is just one of these things that, you get a crazy or somebody that's just trying to cause trouble who comes in and says, well, I think everything they've done is void because we have appointed officers who haven't taken an oath. And you might think that's a stupid thing, but if you saw the lawsuits that I defend for school districts and cities, you'd go, oh, okay, I see. Again, one easy solution is, okay, the people that are going to take the oath are the ones that are otherwise required by law to do it. Now, that begs the next question, right? Which is, if the law otherwise requires it, do we need it in here? Does that make sense? I mean, and again, we talked about bonds earlier. We're mixing topics here, or the current charter is mixing topics. But we talked about potential language on a recommendation of saying, the city manager and those people that deal with the finances of the city, which is going to, there are people up front. I guess the clerk probably, does y'all's clerk take direct payments in the municipal court? Okay. I mean, sometimes they, they'll negotiate it and send them up. Sometimes you have the same person that's doing both. But again, those would make sense. But again, we're addressing these in multiple places and not always consistently. Vacancies. This is one of the places that I was a little surprised at. So what this says, what your charter says is any vacancy requires a special election, which can really leave you in a bind. Depending on when it happens, and there's a lot of intricacies to it, but sometimes you're just so close that you can go ahead and call a special election. Sometimes you choose to appoint, sometimes you don't. Sometimes you think it gives somebody an unfair advantage to do this for 3 months while they're getting, when it's going to be open, and we'll just wait. Sometimes it happens so early that you could really end up without somebody for quite a while. Here's what we do know. We want the election that they have to run in to be only for the unexpired term. We don't want to open it up to a new term. We're appointing them so they have, a full term. But state law actually gives a lot more flexibility. Then the council, who has that authority to appoint, one of the things that they probably should do is come up with how they're going to do that. The reason you kind of want some guidelines is it's sometimes real easy to have a buddy, somebody that's friends with everybody there that we know will be like us, and and just to appoint them. And I've seen that really backfire. Not that that person was selected, but that nobody else was given really a chance to even express their interest. But that ultimately, I think, comes down to trust in your city council. But again, we want to have, I think, a way to replace someone. I mean, it can be, somebody can die, somebody can move. We have that happen all the time. They move it back out to the family ranch, their last surviving parent passes away or becomes ill, and you know what? I've got to go. And I can't do that. It's not like a school district where I'm still in the district. I'm outside the city limits. And so um, I need to do something. But again, giving maximum flexibility so that we can keep business moving as usual. No, ma'am. Oh, no, go ahead.
Say that sometimes the city would take into consideration how much that election would cost.
It's
Costly.
it's real.
And then you have to turn around, we have an election every year anyway. So,
When I got hired in Muleshoe, which was one of my first 3 cities, there was an old attorney out of Hereford that retired, and he called us and said, "Would y'all take Hereford, Freona, Muleshoe?" And I got to Muleshoe, I had no clue what I was doing, no clue. But every meeting, I'm like, "Y'all had another election? Somebody had left. They appointed someone, ran. One of the former guys ran against him. Somebody else did. Then they had a runoff. Then the election came. It was like we had 4 or 5 elections. And finally we took the nice one and helped the other guy get a county commissioner's position. Pass him on to someone else. Mayor Pro Tem, selected each year. It should be. Y'all's language doesn't really say that. Needs to be done really probably the first meeting after an election is a good time to do it. Y'all's does not talk about when it should be done. So what we often do is, we will do that at the first meeting after the regular municipal election. and make that term for 1 year. And they may have that job for 20 years, but we do it each year. I've got towns where they fight over who doesn't have to have it because they don't want it. I have towns where I've seen almost a fist fight break out when we had a terrible mayor pro tem, and the mayor, who was a very powerful man, said, well, I was just remembering that we have a longstanding policy. No, we didn't. But we do it for 1 year and then we go to someone else and just kind of rotate it around. And the guy said, no, you're not going to take my position away. I mean, and I really thought they were going to fight. I've got other places. It's not legal. It's not illegal, but I've got a town, a big town, a little bigger than Harris, that says it always goes to the most senior person. And so the first time I was there, I was like, does that mean old, or, the person who's been on here since they were 22? It's the person that's been on there since they were 22. Does it matter a ton? No. You see right there, I put, this is not a priority, but if we're cleaning up and we have some room, we could at least consider it and talk about it. Compensation, I don't care. What did I see? Yeah, it's like $5 a month or $5 a meeting.
$50 a month.
Okay. Nobody's getting rich. Nobody's getting rich. I've seen charters that say, you know what? I got a good way to figure this out. City council can approve it, approve their own pay. Nobody's touching that, right? And I've seen them come back and say they can do it, but nobody that votes for an increase is ever entitled to that increase. So essentially you're doing it not for yourself, you're doing it for someone else. Interesting concept. People that come from the county world say, thought everybody gets paid. People that come from the school district goes, y'all get $25. One of your neighbors, every meeting, the city secretary walks to each spot as they sit down. She has their check. I think it's $5. And she does not hand it to them like this. She turns it over for them to endorse and it goes into the Christmas fund. You know, I don't care. But what are thoughts? Maybe I'm just curious as to what thoughts are. Say it.
But for these positions, because it must be certified to provide service. You don't do it.
I think that's very fair, but there's certainly other viewpoints that make sense. I had a mayor the other day who came to me, and they've had a run of bad luck with city managers. And he said, would you draft up something, whether we need to do a charter election or an ordinance, that creates a position of a full-time mayor who would be paid? And I said, and get rid of the city manager? And he said, no, 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 no. Their job would be to make sure the city manager is doing his job. And I said, or we could hire better city managers. But it's interesting. And I thought, this guy just wanted to get paid. And then he said, I realized that would cost me my job because I would never do that. I have a job I love, but I think we need it. And I mean, I understood where it came from, but it didn't make it a good idea. Other thoughts? Joe raised his hand.
Oh,
No, don't take Joe to a cattle auction. He just bought the whole,
two, three, 4, 8 hours. Now, that we have, city council has never got that. But, I've seen 4-hour meetings. What do you think, Chris?
the, I think that not any of that surprises me. And I haven't heard, but I mean, I have had councils when we go into this say, you get us paid. And again, to me, it just brings up um, an uncomfortable discussion. I say, don't do this. I'm just telling you. I mean, to me, and this is just me, is if we're going to go to these people with 22 to 27 um, matters that we think are really important that need to be put to the voters, that's the one kind of topic that could divide people and make people turn against all of them. Doesn't mean I'm right. I mean, that's just when my job is, how do we get the most good, that it's just one of those that worries me. But I mean, I've seen people who are shocked that they're not paid. And again, I think those are people that come from the county world. And I mean, again, counties are completely different, but where I have my house in Oklahoma, when you're elected county commissioner, what that means is you're the foreman of the work crew there. I mean, you're out, you drive the forklifts, I mean, it's just complete. I mean, it's just an interesting dynamic. Yeah. Yeah. One other thing, not to guide the discussion, but you can't pay them enough to make a difference. And so on some level, you think, what does it matter? And I mean, because again, I mean, if you were going to pay them some amount for what it took and for the abuse they sometimes take. And again, I mean, one of our problems with a lot of these towns, smaller than here, but why would a local businessman run for a position where he's going to make half the people mad? I mean, he or she absolutely counts on those people. And I mean, it costs us good people. But at the same time, we're having more and more trouble getting people to run in small towns. People always run for the school board. Because it's just some appeal to that. Why anybody would ever run for a hospital board, I have no idea, because you have no clue what you're doing. Nobody has a clue or what they're doing in healthcare. Yeah.
Question I have to do is you, a lot of different sized towns, but
Yeah.
towns our size, what are they doing?
It's some version of 10, 15, $20. I think that's pretty common. Y'all see much difference in that?
I was answering his question. I didn't hear your question.
The pay on towns this size, and I said it's usually in the 10, 15, $20, sometimes per month, sometimes per meeting, but have you ever seen anything much different?
Just depends on the cities, but there is a trend. The council members are wanting a whole lot more. I just read today where down by Austin.
Can you use your
There-
microphone? So we get all
Be on the microphone. When I scooted back, it's your boss. But there's a town by Austin where the mayor is getting petitions to be signed, so his salary will go up to $1,000 a month and council will go to 500. Because the argument is that they're spending more time. And yes, city business is complex, and I'm not saying this to toot my own horn, but if you've got a city manager and staff, they should be doing all the work, and they should be answering the questions and doing the research for the council. Give them that information. Because most people that run for elective office have full-time jobs, have things they should be doing. And, running the city is challenging, but to me, that's where you ask your staff, hey, I need more information on this item, or I need you to chase this down so I can make a better decision. So
They reimbursed for travel or
Absolutely,
expenses
yes.
and that. type
any
of
city
thing.
expenses they have, they are eligible to reimburse. Some council members, very similar to what Mr. Henry said, just realize this is a service and they just absorb that cost and they go on. But anything they do in the name of the city, they're eligible to be reimbursed.
Yeah. down to mileage, to meals, to,
Conferences, training.
yeah. The, and we want them to go do that. I mean, one of the things, this is an editorial, but city council members don't have near the opportunities for training that public school and community college, board members have. They have so much through TASB, Texas Association of School Boards, TASA, just the different organizations. We have TML, but I mean, you go to the TML annual conference and it's, big, high level, everybody's showing off kind of stuff. I mean, it's hard to get training. So when we can have some regional stuff, we really push them to do it because there's not many opportunities. I think we're at a good stopping point. I said I wanted to give some time for questions, and then we need to figure out a couple of more meetings that work. I mean, again, we kind of hit this Christmas deal. Christmas in the middle of the week kind of kills an entire week. But we're wanting to have this to the council for them to be able to make decisions by mid to late January, I think. What's the deadline to call elections this year?
Always.
Okay, and so we want some room. We don't want to wait till the last day, and we had this happen on elections one time. Snowstorm hit, freak snowstorm. Nobody could get there to turn in their applications at the last minute. It's not exactly what we're talking about, but we don't want anything where we have quorum issues. We don't want to be rushed. Questions or thoughts or different way of approaching this? I mean, again, this first meeting, I think it's hard for y'all to understand. I think y'all be shooting at me a lot more as we move forward, but thoughts, questions, and then Madam Secretary, any thoughts on potential dates?
No, actually, I wanted to check with you. You're all busy people, so we don't have, we didn't come up with a list of dates until we found out what our date is.
Oh, is that one more slide?
I only have one more slide. Yeah.
Mayor, and this really does set the pay. We'll finish with this today and we'll start with this next time. Little things. I mean, you still have that old school language that the mayor is the CEO of the city. Mayor is not the CEO of the city. City manager is the CEO of the city. And so again, it just sends mixed messages. The mayor really has the worst job of all because they're the face of the city with less power than anyone. Because I think they only vote with ties. They're the ceremonial head, and it's very important. And the way they communicate is so important. But recommended language: the mayor of the city shall be the presiding officer of the city council, shall sign bonds, warrants, and other official documents. Which again, this is more in line with what I was talking about earlier about who signs. We have officers and this idea. I like the mayor to be the one signing. Things of significance, exercise all powers and perform all duties imposed upon him by this charter and by the ordinances of the city and by resolution of the city council. It's a much more accurate depiction of what a mayor will do. So, okay, that was my last slide. But find us some dates.
James, what are you thinking?
What?
He's editing.
And, disaster declaration for the mayor as well.
Huh? Monday is council. We have a council meeting on Monday, the 16th. I said we have a council meeting on Monday, the 16th. How long before we need to have another meeting? Do you have a week, 2 weeks?
I need a weekend to do my next round of slides.
What works best in y'all's? I know we're right at the beginning of holiday, things get crazy.
17th would work.
How about the 19th? That Thursday. No.
I'm gone 19th.
Just because I know certain people are on vacation already.
No,
Right now.
The 19th I can work. I always hesitate. The 18th is a Wednesday. You know, when I started doing this 25 years ago, if you said anything on a Wednesday, they would tell you what the Baptist preacher would think of you. So I used that the other day when I was putting together an EDC meeting. I said, not even gonna do anything on Wednesday or propose it because I know and understand. And this guy's not one I normally work with. He said, I'm the Baptist preacher. We'll be okay. And so, but 17th or the 18th, would be fine. After that, we're probably looking at two closer meetings after the first, and I'm out that whole week, that whole first week, but
Tuesday or Wednesday, which either one of those.
Tuesday works for me.
Tuesday, I'll be gone Wednesday.
Tuesday's fine.
The 17th, is that Tuesday?
What about Liz?
Yes.
Yeah. The 17th.
everybody's Tuesday, so we'll just,
17th, yeah.
Is 6 o'clock good or
Mhm.
do you-
Mhm.
okay?
and again, our goal is to get you out of here before 7:30.
So let's 10:30.
Well, I can't repeat myself because you weren't paying attention. No. No, listen, I do appreciate this and it does matter. And I hope y'all find it interesting. I'm surprised each time that people find it as interesting as they do. But it is, and there's there's a lot of reasons we do things and a lot of reasons things that we've done in the past don't still make sense. But, I do invite you, look back at what we've talked about today. Y'all have copies of the slideshow and you can see the ones I've talked about. We're about halfway through it, but I think we'll probably revisit some of the things we talked about today. And we will, we'll continue to cover. And then, I'd like that third one to be, let's talk about the language and me to have some language there. Just so y'all understand what it means. What are we really asking people to look at?
Are you planning on finishing the remainder at the next meeting?
That's my hope. If we don't get there, we don't get there. But, yeah, that's my hope.
Anything special y'all want us to look at to, y'all to talk about or?
Even things you've heard, over the years that you thought, why do they do that? Or why do they just cause problems for themselves? Think about that before next meeting. All right. That's all I have. Thank you all so much.